Hello, Alan Ryder, Southeastern Railway Museum, and welcome to another episode of work on our switch engine 8202. Spoiler alert, this isn't the last one. We've got a few other things to do. This is a case of taking care of a bunch of little things, and one big one. Had a problem with the load regulator, as you shall see. So enjoy. We're looking in the electrical cabinet at the SR relay. So anytime a low oil ground relay or hot engine switch comes on, that relay picks up and lights up a light. It also is supposed to ring an alarm bell, and conveniently the contact for the alarm bell is broken off. So this kind of relay is vastly obsolete. So we're going to replace it with a newer relay. And it's not the first time. A lot of the components in this locomotive electrical cabinet have been replaced. Those two contactors there, the battery field and shunt field, are both newer style than what was originally on the locomotive. So this isn't anything uncommon. That's the newer style relay. They use these even on the newest EMD locomotives. It's just a general purpose double pole, double throw relay, so it'll work just fine. This is the back of the electrical cabinet, and these older locomotives, the philosophy was to run all the wiring and cabling on the back, and then the components like the relays had their contacts or terminals set up where they go through the bulkhead and make the contact and connect with the wires in the back. So if I can get the light right, these are the wires here where they come up to connect with the SR relay. Here, those are the contact wires. Up above, I think if I can see right, are the wires for the coil. Everything's disconnected, so the relay ought to be able to pull out from the front. We shall see. And there she be. Yeah, the relay's mounted. Now all we have to do is to run the wiring. Well, there's the back side almost done. I opted to use screws and nuts rather than trying to do butt splices and taped them up. That's the last one. Fastened together. I just haven't insulated it yet. So far, so good. And here's the front side with the new relay installed. So we're going to give it a test. I've got the low oil button pulled out, so we'll close the battery switches and see what happens. And here we go. The low oil light is blinking. It's not exactly part of the plan, but I'll explain that in a second. And obviously the buzzer is making all sorts of racket. So it's working more or less. Here's the old relay, and here's a schematic that I drew of the alarm system. That up there, this section is the switches for low oil, hot engine, and ground relay, light bulbs, and they all tie together, come down to the SR relay coil. That's this guy, or was that guy. It's an unusual setup compared to modern stuff. In this era, they didn't have diodes. If they had diodes, it would be wired in a totally different way. But the power comes through the bulb in series with the relay coil, and so this particular relay coil is 50 ohms. The one I installed is 1800 ohms as far as the resistance of the coil. So in the past, there was, when this closed, this goes through this contact, and that's a 20 ohm resistor, and the idea is to have enough current flow to light the bulbs. And because this is such a much higher resistance on the new relay, most of the current goes through here, and there's not enough to pick up the relay. So what happens is the relay picks up, that closes, the relay drops out, the relay picks up again, and it just chatters. But you know, in reality, this is an alarm system. It's to get your attention. So more than likely, we'll just leave it like it is and let it chatter. It's not really hurting that much. There are ways to fix it, but is it worth it? I don't think so. So, alarm system and new relays installed, and we'll move on to other adventures. Well, being the type not to leave well enough alone when I probably should, I did a bit more tinkering with this relay and the resistor that shunts across the coil to make the light go on, and I found out that if I had got rid of the 20 ohm resistor and put a 50 ohm in its place, there's still enough current going through it that the relay picks up and stays up, but there's enough current that the light comes on. So I will switch the resistors around and we'll have a light, and we'll have a relay that stays up and doesn't chatter. Very minor point, but sometimes it's an itch you can't avoid scratching. So there's the old resistor and the new one, 50 ohm, next to it. Physical size really isn't all that important. It's just whatever we happen to have. The old one, I believe, was 20 ohms, and the new one is 50. So now got the old one off, now we'll put the new one in. And this is where we got to go with the new resistor. That white square is where the mounting block was for the old one. So drill a couple holes, install the new resistor, and run some new wires. Resistor installed, wiring labeled and hooked up, old stuff cut off, all is good. Rewired, and the light is on like it's supposed to be. Relay's not chattering. Buzzer's buzzing. Ah, relief. We're under the cab floor looking at this little piece of copper tubing that's sticking up through the floor. And that leads down to the truck center casting, and it's an oil line to allow us to put oil and lubricate the center casting as the locomotive ages, and it's a routine maintenance item. You put oil in here so that it continues to do what it needs to do. And there's supposed to be a reservoir here, and it's gone. This locomotive might have been converted to have grease rather than oil to lubricate the center castings or the truck swivels. But we're going back to oil. So, like I said, the original reservoir that goes on there is missing. I'll show a picture of that on one of our other locomotives. In lieu of that, I've made up a replacement reservoir out of a piece of pipe, and I'm going to mount it right there and run a little piece of copper tubing to connect it up, and that'll do the job. A flare union, short piece of copper, and my pipe / reservoir ready to be put together. And there it is, fully installed. Take the pipe plug out just like that. Put oil in it. You probably can't see it because of the way the lighting is, but I even added a label here so people will know what this is for. One of the detective wiring projects I've been working on is getting rid of wires that seem to go nowhere, just hanging loose, tracking them down and finding out if we need them or we don't need them. If we don't need them, we're getting rid of them. And this is one of the last examples that I haven't taken care of yet. That fuse holder, the top wires go directly to the batteries, don't bypass the battery switch, don't go through the battery switch, just go right to the batteries. And the wires on the other side of the fuse holder, I don't know where they go yet, so I have to track that down, and up above it, that's the back of a switch, and don't know where that goes either. Doesn't appear to be related to the fuse holder. So again, a bit of tracing to do and probably wires to remove. Turns out the set of wires on the fuse holder that were connected directly to the battery switch go to that amber light up there. And had already looked at the wiring. The wiring is deteriorated, and so we have to make a decision. That light is not appropriate for the paint job on this locomotive. So the question is, do we want to rewire it and set the light where it's on a switch someplace, or take it off completely? So a decision needs to be made. At this point, I've disconnected the wires from the fuse holder, probably cut the wires off the battery switch, make that all safe, and we'll do some other stuff. So there's where the wires from the fuse holder connect to the back of the battery switch, and those are direct connections to the battery. So I'm going to reach in there with my diagonal cutters and cut those wires off. And there they are, cut off. Well, it turns out that that mystery light switch is for the engine room lights, and the switch was bad, so bought a new switch, and then I repurposed the fuse holder for a fuse for that circuit, because from what I can tell on the schematic and what I can tell in the electrical cabinet, it wasn't fused, and that isn't that great an idea. So it was there, so I used it. So I'm up on the roof of our switch engine, and after a bit of consultation, we decided that we are going to put this amber light back in service. At some time in the future, we may paint the thing back to black, which would be more appropriate for all the other things that are on this locomotive. And in black, this was an item that was on the locomotive, so we're going to make it work again. And just an interesting story about these. I don't know how accurate it is or how much of it's legend, but supposedly these were put on southern switch engines so the yardmaster could figure out where the crews were, where they're working, or whether they were hiding or not. And as I mentioned earlier, these things were wired directly to the battery, so there was no way to turn them off. But there is a way, because the crew simply took a bucket and sat on top of the light, and then they disappeared from sight. To say this socket was in bad shape is an understatement. It's pretty much garbage. The socket was deteriorated. Both screws broke off when I tried to take the insulating, whatever it is, gasket out. And it's full of rust, so most likely the solution is going to be to replace the whole socket, if I can get it off. And if I can't get it off with a wrench, get it off with an angle grinder or a blue flame torch. We have our ways. Well, there's more than one way to skin a cat. Took the bracket loose and then loosened up the bracket from the socket, spun the conduit around, and got her loose. So I spent about an hour or so, maybe two, looking around the shop and looking around in our diesel parts car in Heather and Jan for some replacement fixtures, which I could have sworn up and down we had, but I can't find them. But what I did find is this, which is a replacement socket. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to drill out and retap as necessary those broken off pieces. So I got my handy dandy Harbor Freight die grinder, and we're going to first level off the tops of those screws, and then after I do that, then I can drill them out. Big noise. looks pretty good. So, nice thing about this is that this is brass and the housing is cast iron. So, naturally, the drill bit's going to find the brass. Well, it feels like the battery is going south, but we have a solution. Two. That's an 832 tap, so we'll clean the hole out. Try not to get too overzealous because it would be much more difficult to get a broken tap out. One down, one to go. Good as new, more or less. Well, I'm back on the roof of 8202, and we found enough sockets that we can go ahead and work on the other lights. So I'm going to put this sucker back together and wire it up. So there's the pieces and parts. One of the reasons that this fixture was so corroded and deteriorated was that it was never designed for an outdoor application. This particular socket was actually designed to be upside down, or actually be right side up, like that, and it isn't. So even when it's screwed in, water runs down the globe, runs around the threads, and fills up the bottom of the socket assembly, or the housing assembly. So can't fix that permanently, but we can deal with the water. So if you look, you can see the little shiny spot there. That's a hole I drilled in the housing. So between that and the bolt hole where it's mounted, that should allow whatever water that gets in it to get back out. So that's the plan, and we're sticking with it. As part of my effort to protect this thing from moisture, I've put some dielectric grease on the screw studs, and this blob of goop is electricians call it dum-dum or duck seal, and what I'm going to do is to shove that or part of it into the conduit opening here where the wires come through, so that hopefully most of the water will run out the bottom of the fixture instead of down the conduit. Light installed, complete with bulb. All that's left up here is to put the covers on the pulling L's. And the wiring is pulled through, and I put it in some wire loam to protect it somewhat, which is better than it was before. So it comes through into the cabinet, to the thermal boards, and back to the switch. So for the amber light switch, we have this convenient hole here that was for something else, and we're going to reuse that for the switch. Took a little bit of modification to get the switch to fit. Didn't really want to cut open the cabinet, but we figured out a way. You can see you can't really get the switch through. It's not quite the right size. Took a wall plate like that one and flattened it out and made this. So we will use that as the mounting plate for the outside. There's the switch installed, outside view. and inside view. There's an expression, every 20-minute job is one broken bolt away from becoming a 3-day ordeal. And here's the corollary. If you look closely, the slot is stripped out. But fortunately, with a little bit of pounding and a bigger screwdriver, the fastener god smiled upon me and I was able to get it out. And we have light. All the covers are on, all the wires pulled, everything is hooked up, and all is good. This is the combination switch and fuse box for the lights, and in tinkering around with it, I discovered one of the fuses was blown, and looking more closely on the fuse holder, I discovered that they had used a replacement screw, this one right here, to secure the legs of the fuse holder, or one end of it. And that's not supposed to be that way. These things use a smaller screw with a nut on the other end. This one would have been fine, except it's too long, and it had grounded out on the back of the box. So I found a smaller screw and we're going to replace it. So there's the replacement screw installed, so that should take care of it. Of course, we'll check it and be sure it's not grounded, but another little problem taken care of. And there's the panel with the cover back on. So we'll move on to other things. Well, I said a minute ago I was going to check the locomotive for low voltage grounds, and unfortunately I found one. It has nothing to do with the lighting circuit. Instead, it's the load regulator, and it isn't good. Already been here once fixing a grounded wire down there where it comes up from the resistors into the load regulator commutator, but that part's fine, so's all the resistors. But looking up here, you can see this section of this insulating ring is burnt up, and that's not a good thing. I already chiseled all the carbon out of it, but unfortunately patching it up probably isn't practical. We may do that for a little while, it may keep us going, but ultimately we're going to need a new load regulator. More fun, unexpected fun. So it's been 2 or 3 weeks since I looked at this load regulator, and since then I've gotten a few leads on where to get possibly replacements. Not sure exactly where we're going to go on that. We're still looking around to see what we can do. In the interim, I'm going to see what I can do to patch this one up. It may last 5 minutes, it might last forever, but we're going to clean it up a little bit and see where we can go. So first step is to see if I can get rid of the rest of this carbon that's chiseled out, chisel the carbon out. Big noise. That's a broken off piece of a hacksaw blade, and I'm going to use it to just make sure the slots in the commutator are clean. That really doesn't have a whole lot to do with this issue, but as long as I'm here doing cleaning, might as well take care of it. Interestingly, most of them seem fine, except the one right where it was burnt. So That might be a portent or an omen of things to come, or something like that. And this is crocus cloth. It's basically a very, very fine sandpaper. I'm going to see what I can do to clean up the commutator with it. It's interesting as I clean this one bar, which is right at the top of where the burn spot is over here, seems to be a lot cleaner, and that means that the crocus cloth is cleaning that better because it's maybe a little bit higher than the rest, which is not a good thing on a commutator. You know, if this was like a commutator on a motor or a generator, that would probably cause it to fail fairly quickly. It is not good, but at this point we'll just have to live with it. This is electrical contact cleaner, and we're going to give it a good spray down and then let everything dry up. Contact cleaner will evaporate on its own, but we're going to give it a fair bit of time before we come back for the next step. So this stuff is called glyptal, or the equivalent of it. Most of the time you buy a glyptal insulating paint or varnish in either quart or gallon containers, and we need a whole lot less than that, so we got this. Company may just repackage the larger stuff, but if you buy large quantities, it dries up by the next time you need it. So we're going to proceed to coat this area that's got the issue. Well, that looks like it's pretty much got it cleaned up, and we'll let it dry, check it out again, and perhaps put another coat on. And this glyptal paint, just as an FYI, is used in motors and all sorts of electrical equipment. And if you look in this load regulator housing, all that red all around the commutator, around the housing, around the back of the commutator, all the way down here, that's all coated with glyptal paint. So it is a common tool for motors and load regulators and generators and you name it. So we'll see if this holds up. Either way, we're keeping our eyes out for a replacement load regulator assembly. And a load regulator assembly is this whole thing, not just what you see there. Well, it's been a couple of weeks. Had to wait until the cold weather, last gasp of winter passed. But we got water going in it now. We're going to fire her up and see if our repairs to the load regulator hold. So here we go. Well, I've got you trained right on the load regulator. So in a minute we're going to start it up, and you'll get a ringside seat as to whether or not it's going to work okay or erupt in a ball of smoke. Engine's running right now. Sorry about the racket from the air compressor popping off. We'll deal with that at a later time. Right now the load regulator arm is in what's called maximum field. That puts the maximum amount of current through the main generator excitation for maximum loading. As it moves around toward the bottom of the screen, that's a minimum field, and that would be the minimum amount of loading. This locomotive has what's called a road or yard selection, and in the yard selection the load regulator stays in maximum field. If you put it in road, that energizes something called the ORS in the governor, which puts the load regulator wiper in minimum field while the throttle is closed. And when the throttle is opened to load the locomotive, that ORS is de-energized and the wiper will gradually swing around toward maximum field so it gives you a smoother loading. In the yard position, as soon as you open throttle, it loads, and it loads heavy. You can probably hear it. You can hear the engine bog down as it loads. So that's a bit of explanation of how this thing works. And I'm fiddling with the throttle right now, mostly in minimum field, opening and closing the throttle, and you can see the arm moving back and forth. Open the throttle and it moves toward maximum field, which is up in the screen. Close the throttle and it moves toward minimum. Uh-oh. Didn't see that till I reviewed the video, but that's not good. That's most likely the brush is crossing against that one high commutator bar. Another argument for replacing the load regulator. We may try to file it down, but again, the future does not look too good. Alright, here's the situation with the load regulator. I thought that this one bar here where the flashes were was high, but actually what I'm finding is it appears that it is not connected to its respective resistor tap. Now, it might have burnt up right in there. It might have been a wire down below, but each one of these bars in the commutator is connected to one of these resistors. You can see all the different taps on them. And so what I'm going to try first, and I doubt that I'll video it, but I'll use this our good old handy dandy Simpson meter to try to figure out which bar goes where, and figure out hopefully which one's not making continuity. But what's happening, because that one bar is not connected to its respective resistor, when the brushes hit it, it's an open circuit, so you get a big arc, and then it hits the one that is connected and you get another arc. So we're going to try to patch it up, or at least diagnose it. Well, that attempt at diagnosis didn't really pan out terribly well. The problem is that because these are very low resistance resistors in through here, it's very difficult to use a meter to isolate which wires go where. The difference between a quarter of an ohm and a dead short, which is what we're looking for, is almost nil. Plus, after looking at these, even if I did figure out which line had a problem, it would be almost impossible to get to the wires and repair them. So my next step was I went ahead and peeled back this insulating tape here and looked at the taps and determined that these taps are fine, that the wire is connected fine. There's nothing obvious with the wires to the resistor bank, so my guess is somewhere in this bundle, probably where it rubbed against the car body or the frame of the cabinet, that wire is open. And yes, there is a way to patch it. That would be simply to probably cut into this insulation between the bars. The bar goes through here and then up this, and basically short across the open commutator bar, the locomotive would never know the difference because the resistance are so small. But the reality is, it's not really worth the effort. You know, we need to replace the load regulator, and so we're just going to leave it like it is. Locomotive will run fine. We generally keep it in maximum field, which means this load regulator wiper is generally over on this side. So we'll be fine, and even if it crosses over and burns, it's like, so what? You know, we're going to replace it anyway, so if it's got more damage, it's not a big deal. So we're going to call it at that. What it means to you is that sooner or later you'll get the pleasure of seeing us replace this load regulator. And with that, we're going to call it for this video. Got a lot of little things done, ended up with a pretty major problem, but it's workable. We'll get it fixed. Still got a bunch of little things to do. We need to paint the inside of the cab, some cleanup, some other pieces and parts that need to be put back on. So we're moving along. And as always, thank you ever so much for watching. Hope you enjoyed it, and come see us sometime. We'd love to have you around. Got lots of pieces of equipment to look at besides our wonderful little switch engine here. So come on out. Thank you very much.